Welcome to Game Design Hour, the podcast where I interview the people who create the video games you know and love. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on today's episode, I'm interviewing Nick Lives, Jordan Farr, and David Johnson about all of their work on the video game Camp Canyonwood. Camp Canyonwood is a video game where you play as the head counselor of a sleepaway camp, make improvements to the camp, and you also keep the campers entertained and alive. You know, the one thing I've really learned from this video game is no camp should ever hire me as a head counselor, or a counselor in general. All that aside, let's get into the interview. What was the first thing that really sparked your interest in creating video games?
I mean, we were all just very into gaming in general in high school. We all met in high school, but it was this technology student association thing at our school that got us into actually trying game development specifically, because they had a game development program in this thing. It was mostly for robotics and other disciplines. It was like a multi-technology contest thing for high school students. Do you guys have any input on that?
Oh, well, I was gonna. Yeah, I mean, you're being very humble, Nick. You were on the team that took that thing to first place in the nation, and so was I, and it was awesome. Yeah, man, it was a ton of fun. I mean, I started out in games thinking I was just gonna make music. I thought programming was dumb. Now I only program. But stuff changes a lot, you know. The reasons that you might get into gaming or making games, especially at first, really might differ over time.
Yeah, I was originally trying to go into film when we all started out. That's actually what I was in TSA for, was for filmmaking. So I actually made a couple films that did make it to their finals as well, but not quite as high as when we made a game together, which made it seem like games were the better option, because we did better when we made a game than when we made a film.
Yeah, we were just 18-year-old kids when we started making our first game, We Need to Go Deeper, and gosh, came out in 2017. How old were we? Good Lord, not that old.
Yeah,
not too old.
But we basically just learned how to make games, making our first game, and it just happened to be a pretty okay little success. So we're one of the lucky ones.
Absolutely. We got to meet along our journey our local game development meetup group that was in Utah. There was this Utah Game Development Guild, partially set up by Josh Sutphin, another game developer who worked at a local studio here. We got more entrenched in the local game development community when we started making Deeper, but we started making 3 other things before that all died in one fashion or another, because there's a lot of stopping and starting with game development when you're first getting started, it seems. We spent a lot of time discussing the plot of our first video games that never came to fruition, not realizing that that's the least of your concerns when you're making a game, unless it's a explicitly plot-driven game, I guess, right? Making a visual novel or something.
How did you all first think of the idea for Camp Canyonwood?
Yeah, that one had a bunch of stops and starts as well, because just cynically a elevator pitch kept joking about having us make, which was Twin Peaks meets Animal Crossing, just because that idea on its face seemed really funny. From there, when we started, trying to workshop it after we were finally done with Deeper, or we're approaching being done with We Need to Go Deeper on early access, we started workshopping the idea some more, and then another game got announced, The Good Life, which is out now, and it was extremely similar to the concept that we were batting around, which was going to be about you being in an Animal Crossing-like town as a photographer, and it was verbatim that, but made by one of our heroes, Swery65 of Deadly Premonition fame. Obviously, we're not going to compete with Swery, so we got to stand back and reassess other settings that could fit this Animal Crossing, the spooky Animal Crossing template that we were trying to make. And then once we picked summer camp setting, that just opened up a bunch of different doors mechanically.
Yeah. Nick was definitely the earliest on the project. He started this entire Camp Canyonwood project up pretty much himself. And I'm actually kind of the last one on. But when I started going in on Camp Canyonwood and trying to add to it, at the same time in my life, I had just become a dad. and I suddenly really wanted to make Camp Canyonwood help answer some questions about parenting that I had. And so for better or for worse, Camp Canyonwood kind of ultimately strives to help you learn a little bit about raising kids, about what drives people, and maybe a little bit more about yourself.
After coming up with the idea, what were some of the first few steps that you took towards actually going and creating the game?
Just lots of prototyping, I guess. At this point, we were already familiar with Unity. So I just, like Jordan said, we just sort of busted open a Unity project and started messing around. Because I was the first on the project and I'm typically doing the art duties, I just focused on what the visuals would look like. So there's just a bunch of different visual experiments that were being done at the end of Deeper's development until we arrived at something that would be able to be drawn at scale, because I hate top-down. I hate the workload involved with top-down games. I was working on another top-down game with some other developers called Harry's Burgers. That project wound up dying, but while making that, I realized how just utterly awful it is, even just 4 different perspectives of animation for every single animation that you want to do. That led to a bunch of experiments with a bunch of like masking and shit. And then once everybody else came on, everybody had their own starting points as to what systems were being built first. And so lots of just experimentation with those like little rallying systems. And I think, Jordan, the first priority for you is like AI, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm all about figuring out how those campers work.
That's been brewing up since day one.
Nick's being really humble here, though. He invented an art pipeline that would get the best of both worlds for top-down and side-on, and have it using actual sprites in a 3D environment. This is something that's actually pretty tough to do in Unity, and you don't see it very frequently. He really should write an article about how he did all this masking stuff. I remember somebody reached out to you trying to figure out how you had done it. Is that right?
Oh, Unity reached out to me, actually. They asked...
Unity reached out to you, dude? That's right.
Some videos that I made of just the mask process. It's really simple. Our characters they are 2D sprites, and their face is a flat plane that moves behind a mask to make it look like they're looking left and right. And so we get all of our rotation without having to do separate animations for each perspective. So it's really handy.
So he can get like an extraordinary bang for his buck. His animation time can go way, way further. You can have way more assets with way less cost. I don't know. I thought it was really good.
That was the idea.
David, what did you do on the project?
Done some of the programming, but primarily most kind of my professional specialty is music and sound. So for me, starting off, it was just kind of messing around with music, looking for inspiration, figuring out where we wanted to take it, putting together templates of instruments, just figuring out the overall timbre, what the music would be like, seeing how it would kind of mix and match. So we have kind of 2 sides of the game, like we said. You want to give that impression of Animal Crossing meets Twin Peaks. So you have a little bit of the cute stuff, like it's summer camp, but you also have a little bit of bite, a little bit of kind of some horror elements. So it's a lot of figuring out how to kind of mix those and give both sides of that coin. Yeah, drawing on things like Psychonauts, and then for a lot of like kind of the nice rustic guitar stuff, harmonica stuff, but then also the drawing from other things like Twin Peaks, but also like, Silent Hill, kind of fun synth music, kind of mix and match all those elements to give it some bite along with kind of the cute and charming look of the game.
So pretty much every game has ideas that got cut for one reason or another. Were there any interesting ideas that you all talked about that you liked, but just weren't able to make it into the game?
Oh, gosh. I mean, besides the whole other game that got scrapped, basically, there's a whole other game that in existence that didn't make the cut in a way. Yeah, I mean, the first thing we started with was that you would be the camper. None of these things were really implemented, so I don't know if it counts as getting cut per se in those cases. But at the like pre-development stage, tons of workshopping through what a game loop would look like if you were the camper, So there was like more things involving like friendship making is like a core mechanic, which I guess that didn't even get, I mean, that's still there and we'll be surfacing that more, but it's probably not going to look like however we thought it was going to look like then. Initially, there was going to be way more like chaos, I guess, than there is now. The kids were supposed to die. That was the big one. The kids were supposed to be able to
Okay,
be killed.
that's the big one. Yeah.
That is the big one, because that was pretty controversial when we had to decide to cut that. We're like, oh, it's so funny that kids can die in this, but it's also extremely dark that kids can die in this. And maybe too dark even for our audience of like, you know, life sim spooky hybrids. We kept talking about like ways to like lighten it up, be like, oh, maybe like a gravestone just pops up or a little ghost flies up. But like if a kid drowns, the kid drowns. There's no lightening that up.
Yeah.
Even with a little gravestone marker. That doesn't mean he didn't drown. That was a big one.
Kids definitely cannot die in Camp Canyonwood. But I feel like we kind of translated dying into other things.
Well, disappearing is the big one.
It is not itself fully lost. Kids could be abducted by aliens.
Yeah. They can be abducted by aliens and have like a vague forever death, you know, off-screen fate that's more ambiguous. They can get hurt still, like they can pass out. If they pass out enough times, we actually just reworded what happens at the end of that, which is instead of they disappeared because they died, it's they disappeared because they went home. They got fed up of getting knocked around by bears and went home.
Managing scope is a very important part of creating video games. How did each of you manage the scope of Camp Canyonwood while working on it? And how did it change from the first idea to what you have now?
I'm really, really glad that we have Nick on our team because Nick is the ultimate scope manager. Like, he is the master of concretely getting a project out the door. I'm the one who kept increasing the scope, so I'll receive all blame there. Nick, how did you, like, man, do you have a typical process for how you kind of constrain the scope?
Well, that's like what the whole like art pipeline thing was about solving. We like to make games that have a lot of content in them. And so that always means a lot of assets have to be made and a lot of things have to be done. And so I try to like just mitigate the amount of work that I will have to do by just the initial choices that are made right at the start about like what the perspective is, how many animations, you know, all that stuff, finding ways to just like cheapen the process, Yogi Bear style. If you're not aware, Yogi Bear famously has a collar only to cover up the fact that they didn't want you to see that they would just animate just his head sometimes or just his body sometimes and stuff like that. So I don't know. There's all these old tricks and shit out there already by like really experienced animators and people from all kinds of industries. And I think that's generally where I look to for that kind of stuff. As far as overall game scope though, that's still just like killing your babies, you know, like,
it is. It's so hard.
That one's just, that's what it is on its face. Like it gets smaller because you cut something you loved, but you are going to get a game out as a reward. So like when we were pitching the game to publishers were initially kind of afraid of how big our development time frame was. And so we did start lopping things off and saying, okay, that'll come later as DLC. And so that's...
Yeah, or if it's early access, it'll come in an early access update.
It'll come in early access, it'll come post-launch. Yeah, we just like kind of chopped and moved the stuff we want, and it basically made them stretch goals instead of things that need to be in the game for it to launch. That is the beauty of game development now, is that even if you have a scope creepy mindset, as long as you get the game out at all, you can always add some of those things later. And so that's kind of nice, depending on the type of feature it is, of course. As you continue to make games, you also just understand better what you can handle. And so I like avoid 3D things like the plague because that's just not my territory. We only have a handful of 3D assets in our game, and they're with a tool that I'm familiar with because I know that tool is good at making assets that look like the thing we need them to look like. So Pro Builder is really bad at like organic looking things, but if your organic looking things are sharp rocks, it's just fine.
So you three are the only members of the team that created this game, correct?
There was one other developer who worked on Deeper who was with us at the beginning of Camp Canyonwood's development, which is Jordan's brother, Ryan Farr. But he's a baller bro who decided to leave us for grander pastures over at Facebook, now Meta, I guess. And that's still what he does,
he's too
right?
cool for us.
We go to him with the dumb questions.
We do. Sometimes when we panic, we call Ryan still. Help.
Oh, that's dead true.
What do you feel are some of the benefits of working in a smaller team like this in comparison to working in a much larger team?
I think just way more versatile when you're small. And that's the biggest thing, I think. And then we're allowed to be a little more personable. I don't know. The more people, the more of a compromise needs to happen for everybody to be happy, right? So you probably get increasingly watered down. I mean, that's how I understand. I've never worked on a big team, so I can't actually directly compare. Jordan, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, we're like, we really do want to explore making games in that kind of 90s spirit. To kind of describe that, folks making games in the 90s, really, there was no book out there for how to do this. And they just had things that they wanted to make. They just wanted to see what it would look like. And I feel like games today have kind of lost some of that imagination. We have a lot of game design patterns that we kind of accept as,
the holy truth.
But there's a lot of incredible experimentation that remains to be done with games. Like, I think games have not even remotely tapped their potential, especially as a tool for learning, right? Like, actually doing something and mastering it, that's real learning. It's crazy that we don't use it for good. We really do want to make games in that much more innovative, but a little bit more risky way. And so you can kind of see that in Camp Canyonwood. I'm sure when you played it, you felt like, whoa, this is pretty early. Like, I'm seeing this thing real early. And that's true. We're trying something that's really pretty different. I think working on a small team kind of enables us to take a little bit of these risks. If we were a really big company, maybe we could assemble a small team to take individual risks. But this is about the right size to make sure that, everybody gets some creative input, but exactly like Nick said, not watering it down, really trying something new.
How did you all go about doing the playtesting for Camp Canyonwood? And what about the way you did the playtesting for the game? Will you take with you onto any future projects you work on?
We are working with our publisher to help out with playtesting. So actually, they have helped coordinate a great deal of it, and they record quite a bit of the feedback and assemble it and kind of grade it on severity. They follow a lot of kind of old school, but pretty tried and true industry practices of QA. So it's surprisingly formal this time around. Last time we didn't work with a publisher, so testing was, we play it, we look for bugs, and we put it on a Steam beta branch, and more people look for bugs, and when it's stable enough, we push it to the main branch on Steam.
Yep.
This time,
more accurately, we would work on whatever the community is the loudest about.
Exactly. Our lives were just putting out fires for we need to go deeper in early access.
But yeah, as for what the best way to go about it in the future is, I mean, I don't know, maybe a mix. This formalized one is really nice because it does make it way less chaotic to sort of assess what is going on in the game. But more abstract problems still kind of they're still just really abstract and hard to nail down. Like some complaints of like it being a little dull or something, right? Just overall feeling a bit repetitive or something like that. That's still just work it out. Try to imagine why. I don't know.
That's true.
It seems like, no one feedback model helps that one. That one's just sort of everybody batting their heads at it. I actually kind of really appreciate the written articles for that reason, though, for those larger problems that usually users have a hard time giving feedback on, and so do QA, because it's just more of a feeling of the overall game. And I think because like game reviewers actually spend their whole lives writing reviews, they're actually probably the best at figuring out what those problems are. Now that their jobs are kind of going by the wayside, it kind of extra sucks for developers, I think. Because when I read one of these reviews on a classical article style website, I was like, wow, this person, I think, has gotten to the core of the problem better than a lot of the feedback we've gotten has. And that's probably because they are a little better tuned to that kind of stuff when they write so many of these in thoughtful ways rather than the way a standard Steam review is written, which is a little more like, here are the immediate problems that I could see in front of me. I think that does suck a little bit that some of the traditional stuff is kind of going by the wayside, because after reading that, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of the function of it. Or it can be the function of it when it's, not riddled with problems of also being funded by the industry. That sucks. That's that ongoing game journalism problem they have. But when it's good, it's really useful.
How long did it take you to create the game?
We started like the year that we were finishing Deeper. So we want to start there, like three years, I want to say.
That sounds right. Not everybody was full-time for all of it, though.
No. But if that's when development started, I don't know what the cutoff point is. When we all started on it, would be like a year ago. There's a big gap between those two things. And of course, we were working on Deeper as well during all that. So still putting out updates for it, because the updates can never stop with a multiplayer game. Where's the updates? Dead game. They're done making it.
Which parts of the game did each of you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
Oh yeah. Kid AI is just a constant revolving door of problems and solutions. I am still burying my head in the code to try and get these kids to work properly, because under the hood, what I'm really trying to do is get campers and even the player character to some extent to run all using the same systems. We want to be able to show you, but not necessarily have to tell you, that people aren't very nice to each other when they're really hungry, or when they're really bored, or when they're really tired, right? And in order to make this stuff happen dynamically and systematically, we have to actually write those systems that say, hey, I'm hungry, I'm going to go beat somebody up. And it sounds relatively simple on its face, but really going through all of the various decisions that kids kind of have in their minds, and kind of weighing what they want to do at any given time, whether they want to be out talking or doing activities, or they're scared and they want to run away. There's really a surprising amount going on. And they go even farther than that. We haven't exposed much of it just yet, but under the hood, kids have relationships with each other. We know that they give out friendship bracelets, when they've chatted with each other enough. But there are all kinds of ways that we're kind of soaking up information about relationships and putting it back out. So, for instance, all relationships between campers have a few properties about them that sound really weird on their face, but kind of describe orthogonal concepts. One of them is affect. Affect is how much one person likes another person. The other one we call either fear or respect, and it's the amount that somebody thinks the other person influences them. It's the amount of power they think they have over them. If you combine these two values together, you start to get sort of a numerical value for how likely it is that a camper is going to do what another camper wants them to do. So that's just kind of a peek into like the depth of the relationship system. We really, I'll say it again, we really are trying to make something that is quite different.
That's definitely, I think, where the bulk of the like difficult work has gone is into all of that AI stuff. The closest thing I can think of is that we also just had a lot of difficulties initially with the saving system, but that's just because saving seems to just generally be a difficult problem. It's just logically unintuitive for our brains.
Yeah, it's the standard technical issue. Yeah.
It's a common feature that turns out to be a big pain in the ass. Like if you have like all this like customization and stuff and all these things that you want to keep track of and characters you want to keep track of, their stats, all that stuff. So it turns out to be, I mean, I'm making it a bigger deal than it is because we literally use a tool called Easy Save to make our lives easier. Has Miles heard from other developers on the specific difficulty of water?
Of water.
Okay. I have not really heard too much about the difficulty of water. I don't think I've had too many other games that have involved water, but what did you find really difficult about water in creating Camp Canyonwood?
Oh, it turned out to be a big bundle of factors. We wanted swimming activities and canoeing activities, and we recently had to cut them from our development schedule because we realized that there's just so many problems that come with them. The A-star grid, which is how characters pathfind, has thus far, by necessity, had to be limited to land so that characters aren't falling into the lake by accident and things like that. And now we have to basically take a few steps backwards to get all that also working in a completely separate plane, which is this water plane, which also has different rules for gravity and different rules for all these things. And we have a way of locking you off from other lands, and that's one of those is just put a river in the way so that you'll have to build a bridge across it. And well, if you can swim, it's not it won't stop you anymore. So yeah, there's just so many factors that came up, and we were just kind of laughing internally because it sounds like water is a pain in the butt for a lot of projects for similar reasons. It kind of opens up a lot of doors. I mean, I'm sure you've also heard of the doors themselves are a huge pain in the ass for game developers. There's an entire article written about all the door problems that developers have. So I'm assuming it's only extremely similar for water. But yes.
Yeah.
I'm back. I made it. Okay.
Oh, Jordan's back.
Jordan's back.
Welcome
Sorry
back.
about that. This storm is mad real.
Woo.
It feels... Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to tell Jordan not to get killed by a tornado.
Oh.
Fine. Maybe I will.
Throughout playing many different summers of the game, it feels like some of the personalities for campers repeat. Is there a set grouping of personalities that is just distributed out to campers?
There is. That's right. Right now, campers come with personality archetypes, and they have a lot of dialogue that is pre-written, a lot of it by my wife, who was a preschool teacher for years and years and years. So she has all of this childcare expertise. And I thought it'd be very fun to tap her expertise and also some of the expertise of one of her childcare expert friends. And they just wrote a bunch of really funny dialogue. And yeah, it's one of those places where we can just continuously add content ad infinitum. So expect more personalities in the future. I do see your point, though. There's only right now maybe 17, 18 fully written out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There were a couple of incomplete ones that we got to... Dude, there's bugs. There were a couple of incomplete ones that made it into the pool and actually probably did cause a couple of bugs.
What was your process for designing and creating the layout of the camp?
Yeah, that was just a lot of, I guess, trial and error. We started with, I usually just draw a map in Photoshop. Actually, it turned out to be very convenient when we found out how to directly draw height maps in Photoshop and then just import those into Unity rather than using Unity's default terrain tools, which we are using, but we're now not having to paint it in Unity. Thank goodness. That's awful, awful workflow. So don't do that if you're going to use the terrain system. Yeah, we have actually now pretty nice workflow for that, which is just you can draw a map in Photoshop and then you can test it out in the game. I haven't gotten to do as many of those iterations as I wanted to, because our gray box period was like non-existent. I don't know. I looked at a lot of camp maps and just I've been like looking at a lot of other video game maps and stuff to just kind of see like what works and what doesn't. In addition to like the lessons that we've ourselves learned through the maps that I've made. Like we started with this like really gigantic map with a gigantic lake, and it just felt so barren and empty. Like tightening things up seems to really be beneficial for outdoor spaces in games, at least for ours. You know, having a lot of density of interest. I don't know. I guess I'm not an expert on that still. So, I mean, any answer I'm going to give is going to be a sophomoric answer, but that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you like the map,
it's so funny.
Then I guess we're doing a good job.
Like 10 years. But we are there's still so much to learn.
Yeah. I mean, when you got to learn an entirely new hat every other week, you can't be good at all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what. Oh, I keep interrupting you with jokes. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I was just going to say that's what Nightmare Before Christmas taught me. Is you know, stick to what you're good at. Anyway, that was the joke that I interrupted you with.
No worries. Are there any Easter eggs that you have added into the game that you found really interesting or you really liked, but you haven't really seen too many players find? I
mean, there is one camper archetype that will only be named after different killers from horror movies that I made. I don't think anyone's noticed that's what their name correlates to. It's like they're generally the most the kid who's most likely to bully. They're like the most temperamental kid. They used to come with an axe. That was the joke.
That's wild. I honestly didn't even know that. That is a well-kept secret if there's only 3 of us and I had no idea. That's one of the crazy things about working on a small team where everybody has a lot of creative freedom is sometimes you end up with surprises from each other.
Yeah.
This totally happens.
This is a not uncommon occurrence.
So the game is still in early access. What sort of content can fans of the game look forward to seeing in the future?
A whole bunch of stuff. We have our roadmap out now on our store page. So that's a pretty good indicator of like at least the big kind of headliner features that we plan to add. Oh gosh, I want to pull it up here so I can see some of them. But then in addition to that,
the obvious content, we want to open up the map, right? That's kind of the way Slime Rancher evolved. That's the way several games kind of evolve, is by, just gating off map areas, or even like a horror game like Visage that was in early access. They would just gate off areas. So content wise, we're adding more biomes, but we're also adding lots and lots of systems. It'll be a little bit farther out, but I'm mainly very, very excited about the prospect of having campers themselves be party leaders. I think that once we have this, the game will be really, really transformational. But well before that, there are tons of other really, really cool changes that we have planned out. Nick, do you want to pop through some of these?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I'm just trying to remember what some of the specifics were. I have just a roadmap up, but I forgot where our more detailed one was. But we got desert biome coming. We got fossils, maybe. We got possibly a Yeti at some point. We got we're gonna have being able to put popsicles in fridges. We got being able to find a spooky alien in the woods. And we got more everything. Just more. A lot of mores. There's going to be tons of that. Lots of more decorations, more food, more campers, more possibilities.
Yeah. Content is pretty easy to, just kind of expand on and add more of.
Yeah.
Systems wise, we're also really interested in getting a weather system. We want to have rainy days. We want to have wildfires. We want to have snowstorms. And we want this to be able to actually like influence how campers act.
Yeah, more events.
Things along those lines, right?
Them. Yeah. More story stuff down the line as well.
Absolutely. The very spooky, very mysterious side of the Camp Canyonwood coin has an enormous amount of space to expand. We're really, really excited to, keep playing up the jackalope and to figure out what's going on beyond those FBI agents at the entrance to the desert. There's so much that we want to be able to do in the future, even just mystery and horror wise. But one thing that I want to add here, this kind of big asterisk, is that unlike a lot of developers, we're pretty deadly serious about taking player feedback into account during early access. And if there are things that are really, really highly requested that are pretty well in line with our vision, we often actually do them. Yeah, Camp Canyonwood is out in early access, and it feels kind of early because it is. And that's because we want people well beyond us to kind of help shape that vision and make it into kind of the best game it possibly could be.
Looking back now, is there anything you wish that you could have done differently before you launched into early access?
Oh man, not launch a week before Cult of the Lamb.
Dude.
That would be the
we got hosed. Oh, yeah. Cult of the Lamb was a Mondo splash.
Earlier, if we could have launched before both Cult of the Lamb and Bear and Breakfast to have gotten a little bit of time for ourselves in the sun, that probably would have been best.
For upfront, I'm actually not that worried in the long run. I think people who play Cult of the Lamb, who play Bear and Breakfast, will probably want more and realize that there's something that's somewhat similar, but has a lot that's really, really unique and special about it. And I think they'll come find us.
I hope they do. But indeed, it did somewhat screw up launch having these two really big indie games in our same bubble blowing up around us because it was just way harder to get people to pay attention to us at probably the most important time in a game's life cycle. I don't think that's an uncontroversial statement, but it's almost like, I would have done it differently, except half these games didn't even announce their release date until after or at the same time that we did. So there was kind of no way of knowing with some of them. It was just luck of the draw, Oh, you happen to be launching alongside this monster hit. It just happens.
It is sometimes. Funny how ideas tend to pop up in groups. There must have been a real need for camp games because my goodness, we got the Quarry this year. We're getting a lot of camp themes. We're getting a lot of cult themes. We're getting life simulators. People are having similar ideas at the same time. That being said, even though we had a kind of rough launch, that really doesn't narrow our goals. I still think games should solve real problems, and I intend to make a game that really does help people learn a little bit more about other people.
What would be your biggest piece of advice for a newer game dev trying to go and get their first game made?
My attitude is usually just jump into it. Don't fret and don't worry about it being good too much. The first one will probably not be up to your standards, and that shouldn't stop you from finishing it and releasing it, because if you finish it and release it, then you'll have failed, but you'll have failed publicly and in a way that will possibly even be allowed to enter into the indie game lottery. You can't buy a ticket without finishing the game. So I think despite what is commonly thought by the youngins. I don't think the quality bears that much. And we did some market research ourselves recently and did indeed find that quality really just has not as much bearing as people think on a game's success.
Oh, yeah,
all the more
absolutely.
To just put it out there. I'd say make something small too, but like some people are stubborn, they won't do that. So at least finish the thing. If you're gonna make it big, finish it or do the thing we said, which is like put the DLC, just call it all that rest of your game design document, post-launch content, and then release that first chunk that you made. It was like pulling teeth to get deeper out the door.
I'd say if you're a new game developer or if you're looking to develop games, don't do it alone. You know, you really need someone to kick your butt and set deadlines for you and keep you honest. But you also need other people to be experts in the things that you are not. Game design is ostensibly, allegedly, harder than rocket science, right? It is just so massively technical and so massively difficult. And it's not so ridiculous, right? You're trying to simulate entire little worlds with all their little rules. So because there is so much knowledge required, I'd say partner up with somebody or somebodies and make sure that you're not incredibly similar to each other, right? Diversity is awesome, and it actually has functional uses.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been great interviewing all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Miles.
And that's the interview. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow or subscribe. It's different on every platform. Also, if you're really liking the show, make sure to give us a review. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with the podcast, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. If you think a friend might like the show, make sure to share it with them. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time. Bye!